There is a grain that built cathedrals, that fueled armies marching 30 miles a day in full armor, that kept peasants working from dawn to dusk without the chronic illness that plagues modern populations. For over 1,000 years, bread was the foundation of every meal. People ate it at breakfast, lunch and dinner. Children grew up on it, soldiers survived on it, and nobody got sick from it. No wheat allergies, no gluten sensitivity, no bloating, brain fog, or digestive destruction. Medieval populations ate more grain than you do and they were healthier, stronger bones, better teeth, leaner bodies, higher energy. Then in the late 1800s, everything changed. Grain was transformed from a food that built civilizations into a product that slowly destroys your health. The changes were deliberate, driven by profit, not nutrition, and the companies that did it spent a century convincing you that you're the problem, not their product. That gluten sensitivity is your weakness, not the result of what they did to wheat. This is why medieval grain made you strong, while modern wheat makes you sick, and why the food industry will never admit what they destroyed. Welcome to Olden Path. If you've been told that bread is the problem when your ancestors ate it daily without issue, hit subscribe and the bell. This might explain everything. The first difference is the grain itself. Medieval wheat was einkorn, emmer, or spelt, ancient varieties with 14 to 28 chromosomes, simple genetic structures that hadn't been hybridized or modified. Einkorn is the most primitive, 14 chromosomes. It's the wheat that Neolithic farmers first domesticated 10,000 years ago. The same genetic structure medieval peasants grew in their fields. Emmer has 28 chromosomes. It's slightly more complex but still ancient. Spelt has 42 chromosomes, making it closer to modern wheat but still fundamentally different in structure and protein composition. Modern wheat is entirely different. It has 42 chromosomes like spelt, but those chromosomes have been deliberately manipulated through decades of hybridization. In the 1960s, the Green Revolution introduced semi-dwarf wheat varieties that produced higher yields. Those varieties were created by crossing wheat with other grasses and exposing seeds to chemical mutagens and radiation to speed up genetic changes. The goal was shorter stalks that wouldn't fall over under the weight of heavy seed heads and plants that responded dramatically to synthetic fertilizers. They succeeded, yields doubled, but the wheat that resulted was genetically distant from anything humans had eaten before. The protein structure changed. Medieval wheat contained gluten, but the gluten was simpler. Fewer types of gliadin proteins, the component of gluten that triggers immune responses in sensitive individuals. Modern wheat has far more gliadin variants because of the hybridization. Your immune system encounters proteins it doesn't recognize. In some people, this triggers inflammation. In others, it causes full autoimmune responses like celiac disease. But even in people without diagnosed sensitivity, modern wheat creates low-level inflammation that medieval wheat didn't. Studies comparing ancient wheat to modern wheat show this clearly. People who react to modern bread can often eat bread made from einkorn or emmer without symptoms. The difference isn't gluten content. Einkorn has gluten. It's the type of gluten, the protein structure your body recognizes, versus the one it treats as a foreign invader. The second difference is how the grain was milled. Medieval grain was stone ground, two massive stones, one rotating against the other, crushing grain between them. The process was slow and cool. The entire grain kernel was ground together. Bran, germ, endosperm, all of it became flour. The resulting flour was coarse, dark, and contained everything nutritious the grain had to offer. Fiber from the bran, healthy fats and vitamins from the germ, minerals, enzymes, everything. That flour went rancid quickly because the fats in the germ oxidized, which is why medieval households bought or milled flour regularly. Freshness meant nutrition. Modern milling is completely different. Steel roller mills crush grain at high speed, generating significant heat. The heat damages nutrients and oxidizes fats immediately. But more importantly, modern milling separates the grain into parts. The bran and germ are removed and sold separately or used for animal feed. Only the endosperm, the starchy center, becomes white flour. You've lost the fiber, the vitamins, the minerals, the healthy fats. What remains is nearly pure starch. It stores for months without spoiling because there's nothing left in it to spoil. It's nutritionally dead. The food industry calls this refined flour and sells it as superior because it's white and doesn't go bad. Medieval people would have called it animal feed and refused to eat it. Some modern flour is enriched, meaning synthetic vitamins are added back after milling removes the natural ones. But synthetic vitamins aren't equivalent to the nutrients that were removed. The grain originally contained dozens of compounds that work together. You can't replace that complexity by adding back 4 synthetic vitamins. And enrichment doesn't replace the fiber or healthy fats that were removed. Modern whole wheat flour is slightly better. It contains the bran and germ, but it's still made using high-speed roller mills that damage nutrients through heat. And it's made from modern hybridized wheat with the problematic protein structure. Stone ground whole grain flour from ancient wheat varieties is the only modern equivalent to medieval flour, and it's expensive, hard to find, and goes rancid quickly, which is why most people never buy it. The third difference is fermentation. Medieval bread was sourdough. Every loaf, there was no commercial yeast. Bakers maintained sourdough starch starters, colonies of wild yeast and lactobacillus bacteria captured from the air and fed with flour and water. These starters fermented bread dough for anywhere from 12 hours to 3 days before baking. That long fermentation did several critical things. First, it broke down complex starches into simpler sugars, reducing the glycemic impact of the bread. Sourdough bread raises blood sugar more slowly than modern yeasted bread. Second, the bacteria partially digested the gluten proteins, breaking them into smaller fragments that are easier for human digestive systems to handle. People with mild gluten sensitivity can often eat properly fermented sourdough without problems because the bacteria have already done part of the digestive work. Third, fermentation produced enzymes that increased nutrient availability. Phytic acid, an anti-nutrient in grain that binds minerals and prevents absorption, was broken down by fermentation. The minerals in the bread became more bioavailable. Fourth, fermentation produced beneficial compounds including lactic acid and acetic acid that have antimicrobial properties and support gut health. Modern bread uses commercial yeast and ferments for 2 to 4 hours. That's not enough time for any of the beneficial processes to occur. The starches aren't broken down, the gluten isn't pre-digested, the phytic acid isn't neutralized, and no beneficial acids are produced. What you get is bread that hits your digestive system as a complex mass of proteins and starches that your body has to break down entirely on its own. For some people, that's manageable. For others, it's not. But everyone would be better off eating bread that's been properly fermented. Even commercial sourdough often isn't real sourdough. Many bakeries use sourdough flavor additives and commercial yeast, then call it sourdough for marketing. True sourdough uses only wild yeast and bacteria and ferments for at least 12 hours. That bread is fundamentally different from the 4-hour yeast bread that dominates supermarket shelves. The fourth difference is what was added to the dough. Medieval bread was grain, water, salt, and thyme. Nothing else. No dough conditioners, no preservatives, no emulsifiers, no added gluten. Modern commercial bread contains dozens of additives. Dough conditioners to make the dough easier to handle in industrial equipment, preservatives to extend shelf life, emulsifiers to improve texture, added gluten to make the bread rise higher and have a fluffier texture. Many of these additives are derived from industrial processes and didn't exist in any food before the 20th century. Your digestive system has no evolutionary experience with them. Some people react to these additives more than to the wheat itself. Remove the additives and they can eat bread fine. But you can't know which additive is the problem without eliminating all of them, which means making bread from scratch using only flour, water, salt, and natural fermentation. The fifth difference is freshness. Medieval bread was baked daily or every few days. It was eaten fresh or within a week. Bread that was more than a week old was considered stale and used for trenchers. Edible plates that soaked up meat juices during meals or fed to animals. The bread was alive when eaten. The beneficial bacteria from fermentation were still active. The nutrients hadn't oxidized. The bread tasted good because it was fresh. Modern bread sits on shelves for weeks. The preservatives prevent mold, but they don't prevent nutrient degradation. By the time you eat it, the bread is nutritionally depleted compared to when it was baked, and any beneficial bacteria that might have survived baking are long dead. You're eating a shelf-stable product designed for distribution efficiency, not a food designed for nutrition. The sixth difference is the rest of the diet. Medieval people ate bread alongside other whole foods, vegetables from gardens, meat from animals that grazed on pasture, dairy from those same animals, legumes, nuts, small amounts of fruit. Their diet was varied and whole. The bread was part of a food system that supported health. Modern people eat bread alongside processed foods, vegetable oils, refined sugar, processed meats, artificial flavors. The bread might be the least problematic thing in the meal, but it gets blamed because it's the most obvious carbohydrate. The reality is that a diet of processed foods will make you sick, regardless of whether bread is involved. Medieval bread worked because it was part of a whole food diet. Modern bread fails partly because of what it is and partly because of what surrounds it. Here's the evidence that grain itself isn't the problem. Populations that still eat traditional bread don't have the epidemic of gluten sensitivity and wheat intolerance that Western countries do. Rural areas of France and Italy where people bake real sourdough from local grain have low rates of celiac disease and gluten problems. The Middle East, where flatbreads are staples, doesn't have the same issues. What they have in common is less processed grain, traditional fermentation, and whole food diets. What's different is the industrialization of wheat. Countries that adopted Green Revolution wheat varieties and industrial milling saw increases in gluten-related disorders within decades. The correlation is clear. Change the grain and change the processing, and people start getting sick. Medical research is starting to acknowledge this. Studies comparing modern wheat to ancient varieties show that ancient wheat produces less inflammation and fewer digestive symptoms. Research on sourdough fermentation confirms that long fermentation reduces gluten content and increases digestibility. Celiac researchers have found that some people with wheat sensitivity can tolerate ancient grains like einkorn. nutrition. The science is catching up to what medieval populations knew through experience. Real grain, properly prepared, is food. What modern industry produces is something else. The conspiracy is that food companies can't admit this. Admitting that modern wheat is the problem would require changing everything. Going back to ancient grain varieties would reduce yields. Stone milling would increase costs. Long fermentation would slow production. And removing additives would shorten shelf life. Every change would reduce profit. So instead, they blame you. You're gluten sensitive. You have a wheat allergy. You need to eliminate grain entirely. The problem is your body, not their product. And they'll sell you gluten-free products at premium prices to solve the problem they created. Gluten-free bread made from rice flour, potato starch, and xanthan gum, products that are more processed than the wheat bread you're avoiding. That's the business model. Destroy wheat, then sell expensive substitutes. Some people do have celiac disease, a genuine autoimmune disorder triggered by gluten. That's roughly 1% of the population, and those people need to avoid all gluten. But the explosion of people claiming gluten sensitivity far exceeds what celiac disease prevalence would predict. Most of those people aren't celiac. They're reacting to modern wheat, modern processing, or the additives in commercial bread. And many of them could eat properly prepared ancient grain bread without issues. But they'll never know because the food industry has convinced them that all wheat is the problem. You can test this yourself. Find einkorn or emmer flour, stone ground if possible. Make a true sourdough starter from flour and water. No commercial yeast. Ferment dough for at least 24 hours. Bake it with only flour, water, and salt. Eat that bread and see how you feel compared to supermarket bread. Many people who think they're gluten sensitive discover they're fine with real bread. They were reacting to hybridized wheat, damaged flour, short fermentation, and chemical additives. Remove those variables and the bread becomes food again. This isn't nostalgia. This is biology. Humans ate grain for 10,000 years without the health problems modern wheat causes. The grain didn't suddenly become toxic. It was changed deliberately for profit. And the evidence is clear that those changes harmed digestibility and nutrition. Medieval grain built strong bodies because it was real food grown, milled, and prepared in ways that supported human health. Modern wheat destroys health because every step of its production prioritizes shelf life, yield, and profit over nutrition. The grain is wrong. The milling is wrong. The fermentation is skipped. The additives are toxic. And the whole system is designed to create dependence on processed alternatives that are even worse. If this explained why bread makes you sick when your ancestors ate it daily, subscribe to Olden Path and hit the bell. Share this with people who've been told they're gluten sensitive without understanding why. Comment and tell me if you've tried real sourdough from ancient grains. This isn't just about bread, it's about understanding that the food industry broke something that worked for millennia, then convinced you that you're broken for reacting to what they sell. Medieval grain made you strong because it was food. Modern wheat makes you sick because it's a product.